this hurricane hitting the roof. And so the leadership of the church thought it would be best not to bring me back until we were in a drought, just to be safe. But, Kristen is a huge part, as you all know, of the story of Ecclesia. And my family and I, we moved to Conroe 13 years ago. And before that, we had helped lead the beginning of what Ecclesia Clear Lake was to become. What I hope that you understand is that this church is significant and different enough. As I said last time I was here, it ruined me from being able to just go to church. I don't have the ability to just go to church anymore. Not after what I experienced with Ecclesia Clear Lake, to where, you get to the point that the gospel of Jesus becomes tangible. Like you can touch it and you can feel it and you can experience it. And then the rest of your days is spent trying to find it again. And so the DNA of this church that has brought all of us here went with us to Conroe. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we planted another ecclesia, but I have folks here that drove all the way from Conroe this morning to be here because that's who we're called to be as followers of Jesus. We're called to not only just invest in each other, but to love each other and to be willing to inconvenience ourselves and our schedules to support and to be there for each other. And you guys sitting in this room do the same thing to this day. It's not just going to church. It's living as the church, which changes everything, which allows you to wake up at 5 a.m. to show up and make sure there's coffee. It forces you to show up to rearrange chairs because there was another organization that was in the room before. Has Barry on the sound for his 15th year or whatever for Ecclesia Clear Lake, right? It's not because of church, it's because of us. It's because of the way we live that life. And so I'm very grateful that I was invited back to be a part of what you guys are still doing. Now, I have notes here. My wife and kids aren't here. They're in Orlando at Epic Universe celebrating. My daughter turned 13, and some friends were going, and so they went along for her 13th birthday. And I'm kind of a last-minute type of guy. I had prepared. I had done the work. I just needed to print out my notes. And as I go to print out last night at a time that we're not going to discuss, our printer didn't have ink. So just to give you an idea, my wife from thousands of miles away walks me through her office to let me know where her backup ink cartridge is. And so she saved the day once again, even though she is in Florida and I am here. Now, I also brought my glasses up here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read my notes. So I may just be rambling, but we'll make it happen. I'm actually lucky enough to be with you for the next 2 weeks, this week and next. And that's kind of a cool deal for me, not only because my friends get to see me be here while I teach, but next week my family will be here, and my daughter has never seen me be able to teach to church before, so that's going to be really awesome. But whenever I was going through the lectionary, I know you guys have guest speakers that come in regularly, and the guest speakers typically work out of the lectionary. And as a recovering Catholic, that tickles my heart a little bit because I love the lectionary. And so as I was looking through the passages, for both weeks, the passage that seemed to jump out of the page at me were from the Old Testament. And so we're going to kind of journey together through the Old Testament these next couple of weeks. This week specifically, we're going to be in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is one of the prophets, and the book of Jeremiah is a really interesting book because it wasn't written as a book per se. What it is a bunch of writings from the prophet Jeremiah, a compilation of his writings that was put together into one scroll by a scribe named Baruch. And the only reason we know that is because I believe it's in chapter 36. Jeremiah says, thanks to Baruch for putting all of these writings together. And so we have Jeremiah, which is a bunch of his essays, stories, warnings, articles, op-eds, whatever we want to call it, that have all been put together in a book. And this book is organized into a couple of sections. The first section of Jeremiah is kind of like what we read with all the other prophets. It's a bunch of warnings. It's a bunch of warnings to the leadership of Israel. See, what Jeremiah knows is the leadership of Israel had begun to give their allegiances to powers and agencies outside of who God is. They have kind of broken their covenant with God to give their commitment to God and to God only, and have started giving their allegiances to other powers. And Jeremiah says that this breaking of the covenant led to rampant social injustice. He draws a direct correlation between who they were giving their allegiance to and the way people were getting treated in their midst. And so Jeremiah specifically talks about the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants being treated in an unjust manner. And he says they're being treated to an unjust manner because of how Israel refuses to take on their role as the people of God for the nations that are around them. They are given their loyalty and devotion over to other things. Now, this is an old story in an old book, has nothing to do with us. We don't see this today, right? It's a 1,000-year-old story. Thousands-year-old story. Has nothing to do with us. So Jeremiah also spends some time pointing out the hypocrisy of Israel. He says, I can't believe that you show up to temple and worship God when all of this injustice is happening outside the walls and you act like nothing's wrong. Again, old story, not relevant to us. Jeremiah says, because of this, because of your hypocrisy, because of the way you treat folks that are on the margins, that are on the outside of society, you will face judgment. And so the first part of Jeremiah is him explaining the judgment that is heading their way. That they will be taken over by the empire of Babylon. Babylon would come and conquer them and would take their people and put them in exile out of their nation that they had been promised earlier. We read, Israel ignores all of these warnings. They ignore all of it. And Babylon comes, and Babylon conquers, and sends the nation of Israel into exile, just as Jeremiah had promised. And it all happens during his lifetime. He's alive when it actually goes down. And so this happens, and then we get to the middle section of the book. In the middle section of the book, he kind of shifts tone a little bit. His tone shifts, and he lets them know that in the midst of the darkness and destruction that they are currently experiencing in exile, that God is a gracious God. That one day God would reach down and rescue and restore and redeem the nation of Israel back to who they were supposed to be, that God would not forget them. And in the midst of the warnings and the hope, there's a bridge. And this bridge is where we find our passage from today. So we have been exiled into Babylon by Babylon, and we haven't experienced the hope that Jeremiah is promising to happen. And so if we could pull up the passage, Jeremiah chapter 29, if you are following along in your Bible app, because I know we don't use paper anymore. But Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 1 and then 4 through 7. This is the text of the letter that prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So this is what Jeremiah has to tell them. See, he's about to tell them about the hope, but we're not there. We're not to the point to where God's going to reach down and rescue them. They're still in exile, and so they're in this in-between time. And this is his advice. Like God's advice, Jeremiah's advice is this. And so I don't know where you're at right now. But for me, this passage comes at a really good time, whether I knew it initially or not. Because more and more each day, I kind of feel like I'm living in the twilight zone. Right? I feel like there's things happening around me, and I look around and I'm like, is anyone else seeing this? Because I feel like if anyone else was seeing it, we should be reacting differently. So this passage, for me, comes at a good time because I feel like we're in an in-between place. I wonder, on my best days, if people have just checked out. On my worst days, I feel like I'm alone in a place I don't belong. Maybe it's just me. But to be in a place where people often cheer for things that horrify me makes me feel like I'm in exile. Makes me feel like I'm in a place that has priorities and values that are just foreign to me. My very best days, I'm cynical. In my very worst days, I'm researching places to move. And then I come to this passage in Jeremiah. A passage where Jeremiah is talking to people who have literally been taken to a place that literally has different priorities and values that are foreign to them. And what does he tell them to do? It seems like his advice is simple to the point of silly. Get married, have kids, plant gardens. Like that's what Jeremiah tells us. Like, Jeremiah, do you realize we've been taken over by a foreign nation and we're not even living in our nation anymore, like we're in exile? Do you get that? And he goes, yeah, have kids. so, at some level, I think it's fair advice to us. Drea, I'm working really hard to stay on the carpet. Drea told me, like, if you don't stay on the carpet, the stream doesn't get you. My Louisiana blood kind of makes me walk around a little bit, so I apologize. But at some point, Jeremiah's advice is fair advice. Because what he's saying is, keep living. Right? Keep doing the things you do when you're living your life. You often hear people say, don't let them beat you. We're not going to give up because of our circumstances. And so I feel like Jeremiah's advice, taken at face value, even if we just took this advice at face value, there's something we can learn from it. He says, pray for the city that you're exiled to. Whoa, we'll get there. Because, oh boy, we may not want to do that on our worst days. But, as is almost always the case, especially with the Old Testament, there is so much more that's going on here. I wonder, for those of us in the room, when is the last time you read an article on the internet? Now, who knew how quickly reading an article would seem like old times? Because now we just read headlines and we read tweets about articles and feel like we've gotten enough information, right? But when is the last time you read an article on the internet? It's rhetorical. I don't need, like, yesterday I read one. It was on ESPN.com, right? Now, when you read an article on the internet, oftentimes there would be words that are a different color or underlined, or both, different color and underlined. And, all right, young folks, like if you click on that word, it brings you to another article, right? And so that other article is either about that word or it's supposed to give us background and context so that we can better understand what was going on in the original article that we were reading. Those words are called hyperlinks. And so you click the hyperlink and it brings you to another article. You get more context and background. Now you're more informed to read what you were reading originally. And the thing is the Bible was written long before the internet. Specifically, Jeremiah was written long before the internet, and at the same time, there are hyperlinks all through the Bible. The way biblical authors would use hyperlinks is they would use certain words, phrases, or themes, and those words, phrases, and themes would carry a string, a thread, throughout all of these other stories, so that when you read that word, phrase, or theme, it brought you back to another story. And what happened in that other story gave you more context and background to the story that that author was trying to communicate at that point. And as luck would have it, our short little passage today has a ton of hyperlinks. And so if we can pull up, start with verse 4. Just joking, start with verse 5. All right. So Jeremiah goes in, and this is where he starts giving advice. Here's how you live in this in-between time. This time where you've been exiled and before God steps in to rescue you. He says, build houses, settle down, and he says, plant gardens and eat what they produce. There's a hyperlink. Go to verse 6 for me. Marry and have sons and daughters. It's a hyperlink. Increase in number. Do not decrease. It's another hyperlink. Okay? So Jeremiah is using some of those words and phrases and themes that the readers that he was writing to and us had the ability to connect the dots to what he's saying. And so when his first readers would have read increase in number, it would have immediately brought them back to one of their most foundational stories, and that's Genesis 1. We all know Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Day 1, God said, let there be light. We know that, right? When God makes mankind in Genesis 1, one of his first commandments for mankind is to do what? It's to be fruitful and multiply. To be fruitful and multiply. And so when we see increase in number, the folks that read Jeremiah would have known exactly what he was pointing to. Remember who God created you to be. And live that life. Remember the call that God has on your life. And just because you're in exile, don't stop living that life. Be the people that God created you to be, even in Babylon. So we read it as get married and have kids, and that is what he's saying, but it's so much more. He's talking about who we're called to be as his people, and not allowing the circumstances that surrounds us to prevent us from being those people. If you could go back to 5. Sorry, I'm putting him to work. I apologize. Key word here. Plant gardens. This should immediately make us think of Genesis 2. Because where did the whole Adam and Eve story happen? In the garden. It's not a coincidence. This isn't part of the teaching, but it's not a coincidence that later when Jesus is resurrected, where does he come across Mary, but in a garden? And she mistakes him as the gardener. It's a theme. And so when Jeremiah says plant gardens, he's not saying, hey, plant some food. He is. It's good to eat. He's saying so much more. See, what the garden is the garden is the place where mankind was most in the presence of God. It is where mankind walked with God. And most of Scripture from that point on is the story of mankind trying to work its way back to the garden. And if they can't get back to the garden, it's searching out where there are moments of the garden evident in this world, here and now. Holy places and holy moments to where we experience the presence of God. That's the garden. And so Jeremiah here says, in the midst of all the darkness and destruction, in the midst of the twilight zone you're living in, search out and plant places where the people around you can experience God. He does not say, wait until God rescues you and plant gardens back in Israel. Y'all get that, right? He doesn't say wait. He says, in the midst of all of the darkness and destruction, while you're in exile in Babylon, surrounded by people that have values and priorities that are foreign to you, don't forget who you're called to be as the people of God, and make places where people can experience who God is there. For me, this is challenging. I already told you. Best days, cynical. Worst days, how do I get out of here? Jeremiah says, to me, you're getting it all wrong. See, we're asked to continue to be the people God created us to be. We're not asked to be the best debaters. We're not asked to have the best arguments. We're not asked to circulate the best social media post. We're not asked even to make sure everybody knows that we disagree with everything. We're asked to marry and have kids and increase in number and plant gardens. We're asked to bring heaven into some of the darkest places. Maybe there's a reason we feel like we've been planted into exile. We're asked to love. We're asked to be light. We're asked to be salt, especially when we're around people that believe differently than we do. It's like, I had this really cool sermon illustration. I was going to bring a flashlight. And I was going to turn the flashlight on. And since all the lights are up, you would just see a little bit of light. And I was going to turn the lights off and you'd see a lot of light. Haley couldn't fix the fact that I couldn't find batteries. So we're just going to talk about it. But how good is a flashlight if you're standing outside in the sun? It's almost useless. Take that same flashlight, go into a dark room, wait until the sun goes down, and all of a sudden that little bitty flashlight is extremely powerful. Powerful, helpful, necessary. Same is true for us. If our goal is to go find a place to live where everybody is like-minded, what kind of good are we going to do? If our goal is to get out of here and go find our home, how powerful is that? In the midst of the darkness and destruction, in the midst of being around people who believe differently than we do, who most definitely have values different than we do. We're not arguing that. We're called to live this life because that's when we're most powerful. That's when it has the most effect. Not when everybody agrees with us. My last slide, and we just keep it up there for the rest of the teaching. See, we're called to bring heaven to earth. We are called to plant gardens where we have been planted. We have been planted in specific places for specific reasons. Some of those we're aware of and some of them we're not. But where we are is where we're called to plant that garden. Where we are is where we are called to bring a little piece of heaven down so that the nations around us can experience who God is in an impactful and significant way, in a tangible way. We want to ruin church for other people. Y'all get that, right? Ecclesia Clear Lake exists to ruin church for other people. To love in a way that people can't just go to church anymore. To love in such a radical way that Sunday mornings are a celebration of what's going on every other day of the week. Sundays isn't the thing, y'all. Planting gardens is the thing. What we do here is we come back and we celebrate the fruit that's being produced in the gardens that are being planted every other day other than Sunday. And when people taste that, there's no just going to church anymore. When people taste that, you're willing to wake up early on a Sunday morning and drive an hour and a half to be there for somebody you care about. When people taste that, you're willing to live your life with and for others. And now, this becomes a celebration of that. In the midst of the exile. The exile hasn't gone away. But we are planted where we're planted for a reason. With us, we're always called to point to God. And we point to God not with our mouth, but with our lives. We point to God with how we love. We point to God with how we live. To where other people around us see it and want to taste a little bit more of it. What is church if not a group of people cheering each other on as we plant gardens all around our exile? It's a different kind of fruit. It's a different kind of fruit that we taste than what we're presented from the news and social media. It's a different kind of life that we're called to live. If you're like me, and you've just felt off recently, and you thought it's best to just go somewhere else and live with people like me, I would say Jeremiah is saying, not so fast. If you're like me, in some days, the only thing you can be is cynical. I think Jeremiah is saying there's a reason that you are in this place and you need to pray for this place. That we are the hope in the very place that we have put in exile. And if you're like me, on some days you feel beaten down and exhausted. You feel like there's nothing we can do. Prophet Jeremiah is reminding us of our calling to be the people that God created us to be. Prophet Jeremiah is reminding us to bring heaven to this earth, here and now. The prophet Jeremiah is reminding us to plant gardens where we have been planted. Amen? So, as we come to communion, this is one of my favorite moments. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a recovering Catholic. Communion is significant. Because even in this room, there are those of us that do not agree about everything. There are some in this room that do not agree on anything except one thing, and that's this bread and this juice. To set aside our differences, to set aside our fears, to set aside the things that prevent us from living the life that God called us to live, and to come to the table together, and to take the bread and the juice, the body and the blood, together. This is our anchor. As we feel like we are being blown by the winds of exile, anchored at the table together. This bread and this juice reminds us that we're capable of living the life that God called us to live, even in the midst of where we find ourselves in the twilight zone. So as we come to communion, it's not just something we do, it's who we are and who we're called to be. As we prepare to join in